states has been allocated based upon population. As one Democrat governor said, that's the only fair way to do it. And yet this administration has altered that formula of transferring money to the states based upon per capita population, and instead have used the largest portion of the money going back to the states based upon unemployment rates. Now, you think about unemployment rates where we have worked hard to keep our economy moving. We've had to make tough decisions in terms of our own budget. Other states, not all the states, made the same tough decisions, and yet they're going to be rewarded for their actions, and it's going to be at our expense. And in fact, if you look at the difference as to the money that's in the stimulus package that goes to the states, as to what it means for Arkansas under the per capita formula versus what it means for Arkansas under the drafted formula, that's over $330 million difference to the state of Arkansas. In fact, that is $390 million loss to the people of Arkansas because they're looking at unemployment rates versus distributing it per capita. Now, you might ask the question, well, why do we need that money? Because we've got our surplus, and I've said consistently that $1.9 trillion is too large. But if you're going to give money to the states, then it needs to be on per capita. We would use the money for projects such as investment in rural broadband so that we can build the capacity in Arkansas. We can use the money if it is allocated to us on a fair basis, and we don't want to lose out on that, even though the whole package is too large. I just spoke today with Senator Bozeman and Senator Cotton where this legislation is pending, and they agree with my concerns. They'll be fighting the battle there in the United States Senate, although they're not in charge in the sense of the Democrat majority seems to be driving the ship, but they're going to fight the battle for us, and I look forward to working with them to make sure Arkansas is protected and that the states that made poor decisions are not rewarded for those poor decisions. The second issue I wanted to mention today is we just went through another historic storm in Arkansas, the snowstorm that blanketed our state, that caused power outages in various parts of our state. Obviously, it's not the same circumstance that we saw in Texas, but we did have our concerns here in Arkansas, and there was some rolling outages for short periods of time. And this is the time to learn from what we went through in this historic storm. And so I am signing a proclamation today that will, by executive order, establish the Energy Resources Planning Task Force. And the whole design of this is to review what happened in this historic storm and how our regional power administrations performed, how our utilities performed, how the state performed, and compare that obviously to other states, and to have some lessons learned for us, either what we're doing right or how we can do it better. I've asked the Secretary of Energy and Environment, along with the Director of the Oil and Gas Commission and the Director of the Arkansas Liquefied Petroleum Gas Board and the Secretary of the Department of Commerce, or their designees, to be co-chair of this task force, and they will be hearing from the power pools as well as the citizens, as well as representatives of industry, as well as the utility companies, as to how they performed. And I've asked them to make a report to me by September 30th of this year, which is enough time to study it in a thorough fashion, make a report, and we're anxious to learn what we can as to how we can make sure that we're properly prepared for the future. And I know that sometimes people make comment about my task forces, but I'm delighted that the levee task force that completed its work, last year. A couple of pieces of legislation that they recommended is passing through the General Assembly, and so it produces results. They completed their work, it's producing result. And then we just finished the Advancement of Law Enforcement Task Force. They completed their work, made recommendations, and those bills are running through the General Assembly as well. So it's been a successful format for me as I look at leading state government. And then I want to announce in terms of SB 24, Stand Your Ground, that I will be signing that bill with this statement. While I have often said that there is no compelling need for this legislation, I'm persuaded by the changes that have been made since it was first introduced 2 years ago, and the fact that law enforcement no longer opposes the bill. I've heard from many in the minority community about their genuine fears on the impact of the Stand Your Ground bill. And for this reason, I discourage this bill from moving through the General Assembly. I have no doubt that these concerns are heartfelt and real, but there is nothing in the language of the bill that would lead to different outcomes in our criminal justice system. After listening to the fears of those opposed to the Stand Your Ground bill, I am more convinced than ever that Arkansas must pass meaningful legislation to address crimes committed against citizens solely for who they are and what they believe. The justification for Stand Your Ground laws and laws addressing targeted crimes are the same. The fundamental right of all citizens to feel safe. Arkansas is the last of our neighboring states to remove the duty to retreat prior to using deadly force in self-defense. Well, likewise, 47 states, including our neighboring states, have laws addressing crimes targeting citizens because of certain characteristics. Many citizens feel strongly that crimes committed against Arkansans because of their race, their religion, sex, or other characteristics are particularly heinous, and our laws require emphasis of that fact. In the spirit of concern for the safety of all of our citizens and joining fellow states in enacting legislation to address common issues, I hope that the members of the General Assembly who supported SB 24 will also support legislation like our neighboring states and 47 other states, emphasizing that Arkansas will not tolerate crimes targeting its citizens for who they are. That is what I hope that whenever this session is over with, we can look back and say, yes, we passed Stand Your Ground legislation, but we also passed very important legislation that would protect citizens of Arkansas from being targeted so that we can make sure that all citizens feel safe. Now, before I turn it over for questions, there's one other bill that's pending, and that is HB 1112, the voter ID law. I will also be signing this bill. And on signing this, I wanted to issue this statement. I've consistently supported a voter identification requirement as long as there is state assistance for anyone who does not have personal identification. The voters passed Amendment 51 to our Constitution, which requires acceptable forms of voter identification. The General Assembly also passed a law that provides anyone who does not possess photo identification may receive one free of charge. And this is very important. House Bill 1112 carries out the strict requirements of the amendment, and it is important that this new law be monitored, and if voters are not provided necessary assistance in voting, then the General Assembly should change the current law to accommodate the needs of those voters who would otherwise not be able to cast a ballot. So with that, I will sign both of those into law, and with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
On SB 24, you mentioned hearing the concerns of the minority community. With that bill being signed into law, if the hate crimes legislation doesn't get passed this session, what will the combined effect of those two actions be on those minority communities?
It won't be good. I mean, that's exactly the reason I redoubled the efforts to pass legislation that will protect citizens of Arkansas from being targeted for who they are or their race. And so I understand the fear. I do believe the law is not problematic in terms of the language of the legislation, but in terms of the reaction of people to that legislation, I am concerned as to how they would interpret this, as to how they will interpret their use of firearms, even though the legislation itself does not, even the sponsors say, it doesn't change that much. And the prosecutors being neutral on it, and the law enforcement makes a difference to me. But I am concerned about that, and so the right message and balance and reaction to make sure everybody feels safe is to pass the, what I would say, complementary legislation to say we're going to have punishment for those and take it very seriously when someone targets a race.
Do you have a position on Senator Hammer and Galloway's, Representative Galloway's bill on the Emergency Powers Act?
My office, myself, as well as my legislative team, worked very closely with them. We spent weeks working on legislation that would accomplish their objective of having additional engagement and ability to say no to an emergency or to a directive during a pandemic. My point has been the chief executive has to have flexibility to lead in a pandemic or a public health crisis. I've worked on this, I've read this, and while it might not be perfect, I think it does achieve that balance, and it provides the chief executive the flexibility that's needed. And so if that bill passes the House and Senate in its current form, then I would sign that into law.
Would you say you support it?
What,
Would
you
you
know,
say you support the legislation?
Well, if I say I support it, then it might make them want to be tougher. So I need to be careful as to how enthusiastic I am about that. And so, as I said, my priority is to have the chief executive have flexibility. I think it does protect the chief executive, make the tough decisions that are needed during a pandemic. That balance is primarily during the pandemic. Other things will proceed as it has been in the past. If you have a tornado or an earthquake, it provides all the flexibility and powers that a governor needs.
You're not opposed to it, at least?
I'm not opposed to
Any additional thoughts?
it in its current form.
Since your comments yesterday about the abortion bill, have you heard any more from lawmakers or any additional thoughts since then?
Well, it passed out of committee, it's on the House floor, and whenever there's not an opportunity to amend it, I expect that it's going to pass the House floor. And it's pro-life legislation, and I support pro-life legislation. The legislators, by and large, support pro-life legislation. And so I expect it to pass and be on my desk, and I will continue to look at it. And I would expect to have a statement on that next week.
Governor, other than an appeal, do you have anything in trade that you've got with the folks who've been resistant to the hate crimes bill to get them to go along with this seemingly complementary partnership of these two pieces of legislation?
Well, I hope that there's goodwill and a sense of balance that should be considered as we go finish the legislative session. In terms of working it, I know that there's many other legislators that are working on this, and that I hope that they reach an acceptable bill that accomplishes the purpose, but yet can achieve the vote. So I know that there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and I'm glad that the legislature is engaged in that, and so I'm hopeful that we can be successful.
On SB 24, you mentioned that you had discouraged it from moving through the legislature. You're now, the legislature obviously did not take that advice. What makes you think that they'll take your encouragement to pass hate crimes legislation?
Hope springs eternal, and doing the right thing springs eternal. And so that's what the legislative process is about. And I think it's the right thing to do, and so you continue to make your case. And whenever I said that about SB 24, as you know, I consistently made the comment that I did not see it as necessary. I did not see it making a big difference. The sponsors acknowledge that, and I generally try to avoid unnecessary legislation because it can yield unpredictable results. And so that's the reason I discouraged it. But at the same time, for the same reasons, it's appropriate to sign it with the caveats that I mentioned.
We've done dozens of stories last year related to the unemployment issues. Most recently Monday, at least 30,000 Arkansans still are, their status has remained limbo. How are you addressing this?
By everyone in workforce services working hard to process those pending applications, to sort through those that are legitimately needs to be paid and those that are fraudulent. Every state is facing that challenge, and so I've been briefed on it. I've encouraged them. We need, if they need additional resources, we want to get that. We want to get it out to those that are deserving of it. We continue to work on it.
On vaccinations, we've kind of gone from, you know, in the top 10 states in terms of percentage of our residents to toward the bottom. Are you concerned about that, and do you have any plans to do something about that?
Well, I'm always very competitive, so I do look at the other states everybody's doing, and there's really some close differences between you know, where we were before percentage-wise and where we are today. A lot of the states are very close. We probably got impacted by the snowstorm just a little bit more than other states, maybe up north if they're a little bit more prepared for it. But I think we're on track. I think we're accelerating it. We continue to watch it, and I think we're getting out at a very fast pace, and I think you'll see that continue. All right, I know that this is a warm environment for you. I know it's a close environment, so thank you for letting me come into the office today to do this, and thank you for your questions and being here today. Thank you.